Jose?
Good afternoon. My name is José Villalba, and I am the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion at Wake Forest University. I'm also a professor of counseling. My area of focus has been school counseling, Latino and Latina college access, and health disparities research. I've been at Wake for almost 9 years in the next couple of days, actually, and it is a pleasure to be here with you all today and to talk a lot about discrimination, racism, equity, and inclusion.
Okay, thanks, Jose. And the intent on this is we're gonna have a professional discussion, and what we're gonna do is introduce you to one tool to help reduce biases, prejudice, and discrimination in teams and organizations. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer. This is a safe space, so if you have questions or your concerns, please bring them up. You can use the chat function. Lynn will be monitoring the chat function, so as Jose and I are going through this, if you have questions, she'll either bring them in or at the end, you can use the chat function, or you can unmute to ask your question. So again, we'd like to have a dialogue as we go through this. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. And the first thing, just to get us started here, what I'd like to do is I'm gonna show you a clip, and it's the Jane Elliott, the Brown Eyes, Blue Eyes exercise. And a little bit of background on this. After the assassination of Martin Luther King, she wanted to teach her students about racism, and more importantly, wanted to get them to see what it felt like. So Riceville, Iowa is located in northeastern Iowa, right by the Minnesota-Wisconsin border. The students in her class were all white, and they were in rural America. She felt it was important for them to feel what racism was like. And in this class, what she's going to do is she's going to use eye color to create a difference between two groups. And what she wanted to do is show the students how prejudice and racism is learned. And it'll be very eye-opening as you go through this in a matter of how quick it happened and how the students were treated at recess. So I'm going to show you that clip.
Blue-eyed people are smarter than brown-eyed people.
My dad isn't that stupid.
This is a fact. Blue-eyed people are better than brown-eyed people. Blue-eyed people get 5 extra minutes of recess, while the brown-eyed people have to stay in. The brown-eyed people do not get to use the drinking fountain. You'll have to use the paper cups. You brown-eyed people are not to play with the blue-eyed people on the playground because you are not as good as blue-eyed people. Well, the brown-eyed people in this room today are going to wear collars so that we can tell from a distance what color your eyes are. On page 127, 127. Is everyone ready? Everyone but Laurie. Ready, Laurie? She's a brown-eyed. You'll begin to notice today that we spend a great deal of time waiting for brown-eyed people. Who goes first to lunch? The blue-eyed people. No brown-eyed people go back for seconds. Blue-eyed people may go back for seconds. Brown-eyed people do not.
Brown-eyed.
Don't you know?
They're not smart. And it seemed like when we were down on the bottom, everything bad was happening to us. The way they treated you, you felt like you didn't even want to try to do anything. It seemed like Mrs. Elliott was taking our best friends away from us.
Did anyone laugh at you when you did? I watched what had been marvelous, cooperative, wonderful, thoughtful children turn into nasty, vicious, discriminating little third graders in a space of 15 minutes.
And what's powerful about this is, again, prejudice, discrimination, and racism is learned. But this was replicated on an Oprah show in 1992 using adults, and they had the same effect. In a matter of minutes, you started to see the discriminative behavior. So what we're going to look at now is we're going to just go through a couple of quick definitions to get us all on the same sheet of music so we can kind of understand how prejudice is learned. And the first one is schema. And schema is just the way we kind of organize our information about a certain topic or an event. And what it allows us to do is, as we're getting ready to interact with this topic, this group, or this event, we can bring all of our stored information or knowledge that we learned from it, and we can bring it to bear to help on interpret and also to guide our behavior. So again, it's the organization of this event, and it allows us to process our external world. Now, the next one is stereotypes. And if you can kind of look at a schema, a stereotype is just a group schema. And in a stereotype, we got certain expectations about the qualities, the characteristics, and behaviors of members of a certain group. The thing to point out on this is stereotypes, they allow us to process information about groups and members of the groups, but they tend to be very generalized information about the groups. And we don't tend to see people as individuals. It's just a generalized view of members of the group, all group members. They tend to be inaccurate, especially if we haven't had personal dealings with particular group. They tend to be negative, and I'll go into a little bit more reason why that is, and they tend to be resistant to change. So again, it's a group schema is what a stereotype is. Jose?
Now you're going to see almost a step process to what Pat just talked about. We first talked about schemas and stereotypes, and now we're talking about prejudice. Prejudice build on those schemas and stereotypes. As you can see, they tend to be negative, and more importantly, they tend to be almost like a knee-jerk or automatic thought that you have that an individual really is not up to task, can't do something as well as somebody else can. And the difficulty with prejudices is as they build up over time, it's really hard to change them. Following prejudice, you have racism. Racism, like I said, is something that we'll be talking a lot about today, particularly during the Q&A. But as you can see on the slide in front of you, it really is built on this notion of superiority. You probably, I'm sure, have seen this notion of white supremacy being talked about a lot over the past couple of weeks, over the past several years. And this racism and this notion of supremacy is built into not only individuals' feelings that they are better than somebody else, superiority and inferiority, but it also finds itself seeping into institutional policies, practices, laws, and structures. So like prejudice, it's extremely difficult once the racism has infiltrated or infected a particular organization, be it business or otherwise, to deal with it, to confront it and dismantle it.
And now we're going to talk about three theories about sources of prejudice. The first one is the social identity theory. And what this simply says is that the groups that we identify with, we draw some of our self-image or our self-esteem from the membership in the groups. And the way to enhance this is that we tend to overrate the in-group, which we identify with, in order to kind of boost the self-esteem or our social identity. We tend to devalue members of the out-group. I'll just use a sports example. If you notice after a championship game the next day, everybody's wearing the championship team's jersey. And if you go up to them and ask them, hey, what about the opponent? They played a great game. They're devaluing and downplaying the contribution, but they're talking about how great that particular team is or who they belong to. And this is why stereotypes may be a little bit inaccurate, is if we identify with a certain group, we tend to overrate that group. We tend to devalue anybody that is outside of those groups that we identify with, which tends to be where we kind of have more of a negative evaluation to group schemas about those that are in our out group. Next one is the belief dissimilarity theory, and this just is the, as people are interactive, we feel that somebody in other groups have dissimilar values or beliefs, then this is a source of prejudice. And a classic example of that is the Cold War. Looking at the Soviet Union and communism and the United States and capitalism was a fundamental conflict in the systems in which we ran the countries and we governed. And the third one is realistic conflict theory. And this Prejudice emerges when two groups are competing for scarce and valuable resources. And you can see be it jobs, promotions, or land or territory. And if you saw the paper today and you saw it yesterday, you had China and India. There was 20 plus people died over a conflict of borders. And another classic one is Israel and Palestine. And it's a conflict of land, but also if you notice on that conflict, there is also belief dissimilarity comes into it. And the more of these sources of prejudice you bring in, it kind of magnifies our theories of prejudice. It magnifies the prejudice towards those outgroups.
So the last definition we'll share with you is discrimination. And the key word on this slide, and the word that I want all of us to hone in on, is the word behavior. Without prejudice, without stereotypes, you really don't have the negative hostile actions that are directed at individuals, which is to say that it is possible, I guess, in some regard to have a prejudice or stereotype and not act on it. But it is when somebody has been subjected to or victimized by any of the beliefs and thoughts that we have, is that it turns into discrimination. And because it is a behavior, there are ways to minimize those behaviors, right? There are ways to minimize the manifestations of these prejudices and these stereotypes that individuals have. When we find ourselves now in a current context, and again, some folks would say it's not current, some folks would say that it's been going on for decades or hundreds of years, and they'd be right, that we have more and more folks pushing back against these manifestations of prejudice and stereotype and supremacy. And it is why this particular webinar is as timely as it is, considering all that we're grappling with as a society.
Thank you, José. What I'd like to do now is just kind of tie these definitions together and put it in the basic ABC model of an attitude. And it's important to do it this way because then as leaders, we know where we can do the interventions. And the first thing is on the model of the attitude, the C stands for cognition and beliefs. And we all have, depending on whatever group it is, we have certain cognitions and beliefs about it, a particular group. And then depending on the content of those cognitions and beliefs, if the majority of them tend to be negative, chances are we have a negative feeling towards that group, or an affect is what psychologists call, or what in the terms and the definitions we talked about would result in a prejudice. And again, if we have a prejudice towards a group or a negative evaluation of a group, it creates behavioral intentions and it results in behavior. And the behavior linked to, if it's about a particular group, it tends to be discrimination, or it's a negative behavior directed to those group members. So again, there's you can see that there's an internal component, then there's also a behavior manifestation. And what we'll do is, as we go through and show leader actions and we introduce the contact hypothesis, we'll show how we can reduce the discriminative behavior and shape new behaviors. And then there is an important piece here, and Jose talked about it in the racism piece, but it is also at the team level and the organizational level. If your culture, your policies, your procedures, your practices, your structure, and your systems support and condone the discriminative behavior or the negative behavior towards a particular group, it tends to reinforce people's prejudice and also reinforces their beliefs about that particular outgroup. Now, I'm going to briefly summarize social categorization. There are volumes of research on this, and I'm just going to kind of gel it down so we can understand it. So if we have a person getting ready to perceive a person from another group, what ends up happening is we tend to use heuristic processing, which means we have these shortcuts. It allows us to be very efficient. We're cognitive misers. It takes less cognitive energy. It tends to be automatic. And what we use is salient cues. And the big three are race, age, and gender. And based on those three cues, we can really quickly categorize an individual. We can activate different stereotype and implicit theories about a particular group and members of that group. So again, this is how we process. It tends to be an automatic process. It's efficient and allows us in a matter of seconds to be able to kind of categorize the individual, kind of understand the expectations and particular behaviors you can expect from those group members. Now, the disadvantages of this processing is that we tend to use stereotype and implicit theories, and as we said before, the content of those tend to be inaccurate and they tend to be biased and tend to be negative. The other thing is once we form a stereotype about a particular group, that stereotype and those implicit theories sink below our level of awareness, and they're operating, and they can trigger prejudice, and they can trigger or influence our behavior to engage in negative behavior about the group, and we're not even aware of it. The other thing is with this kind of categorization or stereotype processing, it creates blind spots. And if we're not aware of it, and we are not aware of the experience of those members of the other groups, their reality doesn't even come into play. We don't have empathy, and we can't see the world through them, and we're totally blind to their experience. So what I want to let you know is a lot of people say, well, you got to quit, stereotyping. Well, what you got to do is, we got group schemas about groups, but we are responsible ensuring that they have accurate information, and we're responsible to ensure we have self-awareness to know where our potential blind spots are and to take action. Jose?
So thanks, Pat. Before moving on to this slide, I want to pick up where Pat left off with blind spots. This being a group of business and business leaders, I really have to tip my cap to Tim Ryan, the chair of PricewaterhouseCoopers, who really has done an incredible job of championing this notion of knowing your blind spots. So after this call and in your time that you might have, if you just Google Tim Ryan, Google PwC, and Google check your blind spots, or an initiative he started called CEOs in Action, it really speaks to the power of blind spots and how we need to check our blind spots. So thanks for that, Pat. This slide is pretty self-explanatory. I'll go through each one of these items very quickly, but things to know about implicit and explicit biases: quicker processing for in-group, stereotypical positive traits and belonging words. We typically use words like we, us, or ours, even though when people really aren't in our group, we just assume that they are. People also tend to perceive ambiguous behavior demonstrated by a member of an outgroup in line with a stereotype. So you think that just because somebody is not in your we, us, or ours, they're completely different from you, which isn't true. You just assume they are. We also tend to categorize folks according to the ways they differ from the default. And this is interesting because if you think about in our particular society, the default isn't just based on numbers, it's also based on capital, social, economic, and whatnot. And so for us, the default in our culture happens to be a white, male, Christian culture, right? Not everybody subscribes to that, present company included. Nevertheless, it tends to be the majority that we think about. Members of the outgroup are seen as similar and lacking variability. In other words, we tend to sometimes see in our own group the breadth of differences and diversity. And yet, ironically, we don't allow that same kind of breadth and diversity to other groups. We tend to lump other groups together as if those groups also don't have the same variety that our groups have as well. People also search for stereotypes that are confirming. You want to find more and more folks that fit that schema, that stereotype. Otherwise, it causes what we psychologists, and I say that as a former psych major, what we call cognitive dissonance, right? And nobody likes to live in cognitive dissonance. So rather than finding things that break down those schemas, we implicitly and sometimes, frankly, explicitly seek out things that prove us right. People also accept the good for the in-group and the bad for the out-group. It's what's called the ultimate attribution error. Our minds are processing so many things so rapidly to think about everything in detail, particularly the way that a counselor might, is exhausting. Trust me, it's exhausting. So our brains just typically tend to move at a really rapid pace. Unfortunately, it tends to lean on the plus side for folks that are in your group, and it tends to lean on the negative side for folks that are outside of your group. And then the last point on here is that people display enhanced memory recall of stereotype congruent behavior. It goes with ultimate attribution error. And so even when something stands out and we acknowledge that, oh, that person breaks from what I'm used to, we tend to forget that very quickly and we tend to remember all the things that fit with our own memory. And incidentally, this is not only how implicit and explicit biases are manifested, but then this is how we end up discriminating sometimes, either intentionally or unintentionally.
Now we're going to introduce you to Allport's contact hypothesis. And this is all about creating a context for change and helping to break down prejudice and discrimination. And there's 4 elements. The first element is norms of equality. There's got to be interdependence. There has to be a reason for group members to come together. There's got to be contact that is close and sustained between members, especially if it's members of different groups. And there's got to be interaction with equal status. And we like to say is be nice to reduce prejudice and discrimination. And what we're going to do is walk through each element of the contact hypothesis and talk about suggested leader behaviors you can engage in to help bring the hypothesis there to help reduce biases and prejudice and discrimination between groups. Jose, will you take the first one, please?
Yes, and because we know these are going to be made available to you, I'm not going to read this slide word for word, but I want to really hit some highlights. The first letter, norms favoring equality, is basically the need, the importance that any organization elevates respect, inclusion, justice, fairness, equity as part of the core value of that organization, regardless of whatever widget it's making or whatever service it's providing. And as you elevate that core value, not only do the people that work there understand that this is something that they too have to subscribe to, but it lets your consumers, your clients, your benefactors also understand, wow, my values align with those core values. That's something I want to be a part of. The other way that norms favor equality manifest is through your own evaluations and procedures. I love this. I was telling Pat earlier this week, this notion of the P4S2s. Review your policies, review your procedures, review your processes, review your practices, and your structures and your systems. This can start at a very micro level. What kind of assessments am I providing for my direct reports? What kind of practices am I championing as a leader? And what kind of practices am I not condoning as a leader, right? And then how do we make sure that the entire system and structure supports that? Those are, and the ideas that you have there, assignment systems, promotion systems, all of those things need to be intentional around norms favoring equality. You probably know this, but none of these things happen by accident. You really have to commit the time to do that. And then lastly, including treating people with fairness and respect in performance reviews and compensations. Again, in getting ready for this presentation, Pat and I both agreed, if I know that my paycheck, if I know that my promotion is going to provide me with constructive feedback, both formative and summative, on my own ability to be equal and equitably minded, then that's something I'm going to work on. It also allows the manager a chance to provide feedback on that. Going on a little bit more with norms favoring equality. Again, role model treating all people with respect. Countless times you hear this over and over and over again. Equity starts from the top. A C-suite, a group of AVPs who do not practice, who do not role model equality inclusion, then lets everybody else think, well, that's not really important here, so why do I have to do it? Assess folks' perceptions of being treated with equality. Data, 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 data. Norms become norms only if they're repeated, only if they're elevated. And so if you don't have any assessments and you just kind of throw out an Instagram post or throw out a really well-worded hashtag, it's not really an assessment of how these initiatives are landing on with folks. Recruit. I see Beth Fay is on the call today. What I've learned from our colleagues in HR at Wake Forest is the pursuit of talent, the constant pursuit of talent. And one of the things that I love about working at Wake is we recruit with an eye towards diversity, inclusion, and equity, right? And so if you bring those folks to your unit, it's only going to make the unit understand that this is something that all folks need to value. Socializing new members, important whenever you bring in a new member, important whenever you want to retain a new member, is to remind folks that, again, these are things that are important to us, and these are things that we're constantly going to be working on. And then last but not least, invite people off the team if they don't treat people with equality. Counselors, it's difficult for counselors to provide constructive feedback sometimes. We try to be positive instead of negative. And yet, if there are folks who aren't subscribing to the values that have been articulated, then there are pretty straightforward reasons for why maybe somebody shouldn't be on that team anymore. And in a way, it elevates the importance of equality and equity as a value.
The second component of contact hypothesis, interdependence. And interdependence is ensure people that are on the team, and especially if they're from different backgrounds, share a common goal. That gives the motivation to come together and work together in order to achieve a common goal. And the other thing that's important for leaders is everybody has their individual goals. If everybody's sharing a common goal and you link individual goals to the common goal, if everybody works together, then everybody wins at the team wins, but also each individual wins. And then stress, the leaders have got to point out how working together can achieve goals, and not only goals, but the organ purpose. And why that's important. And then the other one is build trusting relationships and create an environment where, and encourage people and model the building of trust, reaching out with not only team members, but with key stakeholders. And one of them is, and this has been supported by research, and there was Robbers Cave study, was a field study undertaken by a couple social psychologists. And what they did is they took two groups of boys in a summer camp. And in the first phase, they formed the in-groups where they had a high opinion of the in-groups. The second phase, they brought them together and competed, and they measured the prejudice towards each group, and they found out it was very high. And then in the third group, they kind of gave them a common goal that both teams had to work together. And once they started to work together, they measured the prejudice and they found that it was reduced. So it's that sharing of interdependence that kind of it facilitates cooperative orientation, but it brings people together to work together. Now, another one is Coach K. And the reason I'm bringing Coach K up here is he was our leadership chair when I was on the faculty at West Point. And he won his first gold medal, Olympic team gold medal, and they brought him back to give a leadership talk. And one of the first questions the cadet asked him was, how did you do it, Coach? Because the team before his was called the Dream Team, and they had the greatest assembly of basketball talent, and they just didn't play well together. And the coach said he analyzed that and he realized that these are the best in the league and they're highly competitive and they compete against each other on a regular basis to win games, to win championships and MVP honors. So he had to find a way to get these competitors to come together and work together. So he said before the team even touched the basketball, he'd bring them in. The players would then talk about the purpose, why they're there, and what were the common goals. And he'd let the players develop it. And once, he said that was transformational. Once they were able to create those shared goals, they all had input on it. It was bringing the team together. These highly competitive people now were willing to work together in order to promote the good of the team. And then recognize and reward people that demonstrate teamwork, that embrace this cooperative independence and cooperative behavior. And as Jose said earlier, you want to change behavior in the work environment, make that part of the performance review, make sure compensation is tied to it. This is a powerful mechanism to change behavior. The other thing is if you bring a diverse group together, you will have conflict. And if you handle it in the right way, conflict is healthy because it'll bring a candid discussion of different viewpoints and different aspects. But the key is establish that we're going to solve the conflict in a win-win or a compromise manner, and we're always going to look at what is the best for the team. And if we can establish that and ensure we support it, the conflict will be resolved in a positive manner and also help develop the team. And the other one is on interdependence, and a great way to do this is leaders create peer learning circles. Get people from diverse backgrounds, put them into learning circles where they have to depend on each other to learn, to help in their development. And it's a great way to create interdependence and then start bringing people together. And then the last one is, again, recruit. Part of that recruiting process, who you bring on the team is really going to have an impact on your culture. make sure you bring on the team that people that are used to working together across different diverse groups, and they demonstrate good teamwork and cooperation. Jose, will you take
Thanks,
close
Pat.
contact?
So for me, the most important word that you're going to see on this slide is the word sustained. And a close cousin of sustained is the word intentionality. So the first idea, if you're going to promote and sustain in an intentional manner this notion of close contact, is creating diverse teams purposefully. Second idea is creating a psychologically safe climate. And what we mean by psychologically safe is an environment where individuals feel like they can be themselves, right? Now, again, we all understand that there are cultures and there are ramifications and there are standards that folks need to live by. But if I know that I can live into myself, if I know that nobody's going to be offended if I'm talking to my mom on a personal call in Spanish, that is creating a psychologically safe environment. And that's simply an example. Another example would be, I use he, him, his pronouns, which I normally do during an introduction, and I did not do this time around. But those are ways where you can demonstrate a psychologically safe environment. A third idea to keep in mind is designing workspaces where folks are constantly in close contact or communication. Had we done this a webinar maybe 3 months ago before COVID, then I think contact would have been enough, right? But of course now communication, you have to make sure you throw that in there as well. This next item is a lengthier item. And if you think about the US military, that is a space where folks are in constant close contact and communication from a variety of different perspectives and backgrounds, and yet they know that they need to work together to attain a common goal. Now, team building activities. I don't know how many of you ever remember seeing the movie Remember the Titans, but in that movie Remember the Titans, the coach is very big on making sure that his white players knew and to the best of their abilities understood their African American, their Black colleagues on that team. And because the movie is about integrating a football team that had not been integrated before, the coach in that movie, and it is based on a true story, and I would imagine it's based on hundreds of true stories if you think about the integration of high school and college athletics in the 50s and 60s. These individuals knew that in order to attain a common goal, folks needed to be and spend some time together. Our own Coach Clausen on our football team, the few times I've heard him speak about bringing his team together, he is very keen on making sure that different parts of that squad eat and break bread together, so that it's not just the lineman with the lineman. And when you do that, you also break down those racial barriers as well. So there are some ideas: team lunches, celebrations, conduct frequent huddles and team check-ins. And I oftentimes say this to folks, particularly in this day and age, when a lot of folks ask me, Jose, is it okay for me to talk about race? They almost, they bring their voice down. Can I talk about race? Yes, you may talk about race. You may talk about the realities that we have going on. And a team huddle or a team check-in might be something as straightforward as, I hope you're doing okay with where we are in this day and age. So that's something that's also advised. 2 more points to make here: maintain the integrity of team membership. And by maintaining the integrity of team membership, that is how you make sure that the team knows how important it is to have a diverse team. You have an integrity, you recognize the dignity of all team members. And that's how this goes hand in hand. And then last but not least, I'm preaching to the choir as a non-business person to more business-minded colleagues, 360 assessments, right? A 360-degree assessment is incredibly important as a formative, not necessarily a summative tool, so that folks know what they need to work on, and including in these 360 assessments, how you're part of a team, how you value equity and inclusion, extremely important to make people more self-aware. Back.
Okay. What I'd like to share with you all is the story of Ken Parker. And if you see the top photo here, Ken Parker was a Grand Dragon in the Ku Klux Klan. He was at Charlottesville in 2017. His group was protesting in the morning before the young lady was hit with the car. They were out all day. They got, the heat started to get to him, so he brought his group back to a garage to kind of rest and rally. And he was sitting in there and he was suffering from heat exhaustion and trying to hydrate. And Dehan Khan, she was a award-winning filmmaker. A little background about Dion is that she is a Muslim woman. Her mother was Afghani, her father was Pakistani, and she was born and raised in Norway. So she engages with Ken, but before she does, she asks him, "Are you okay? Do you have water? You look like you need the water." Then she starts the interview, and he starts spouting the hate about the different groups, all the groups that they hate and everything else. And he said what was powerful was she was non-judgmental, and she was kind and she was respectful. She was concerned to make sure that he was continuing to drink. And he said that struck him because he said, here is a woman with a different skin color, different religious beliefs, and she was a nice lady. And that started to plant some seeds in his mind that he started to turn around and started to think about. Now, he went back to Jacksonville, Florida. About 3-4 months later, he was driving through a predominantly African-American neighborhood. He came upon a park and he noticed that there was a group of people there that was having a picnic, and it was a church, and it looked like they were just starting to disperse. So he had some questions he wanted to ask. So he went up on the first gentleman that he came to, and this was an African-American, William McKinnon III, and he sat down and said, "I had some questions I'd like to ask you." And William invited him to sit down, asked so that Ken can ask his questions. He answered the questions. He suggested that they continue this conversation and meet. And so now William was a pastor of the All Saints Holiness Church in Florida, and he invited Ken to come to services. And they continued their conversations over a couple of months. And then William invited Ken to Easter service. And at Easter service, he renounced his path, gave his testimonies, and he was baptized. And so a total transformation, he realized that wasn't the right worldview, those weren't the right beliefs. And so now he spends his time helping other members of hate group transition out of the hate groups and continue on with their life. But again, you can see where close contact is very, very powerful. The last element of the contact theory is equal status. And what's really important here is that we got to set an environment where members of the majority are not always in the leadership positions, and that members of the outgroup are always the subordinates. So we as leaders got to make sure that our leadership ranks are diverse at all levels. And we got to make sure that people can interact as teammates, and it's not subordinates. It's not, hey, just do as I say. We're interested in people giving feedback and having input into the team and how it's run. And again, this is where leaders are seeking ideas and feedback from all members. We have also got to be very purposeful at meetings to create opportunities for everybody to give their opinion and make sure that it is voiced and it's considered, that if we're going to take action or we're working on a project, that everybody has input into it. And the other one is important is that we got to have space to have healthy dialogue. Jose talked about, where you're getting together as a team, you're sharing perspectives, cultural backgrounds, but we've got to be able to, as Ms. Khan and as Mr. McKinnon did, is engage with each other, listen, try to put ourselves in the shoes of the other person and empathize and see the world through their point of views without being judgmental. And then share that information so that we can have a healthy dialogue and talk about the different perspectives and different beliefs. And then again, what unites us is what do we hold in common and work there. And again, this goes back to psychological safety in the workplace, is to have those healthy dialogues and have a venue for them. And then we're going to recognize and reward those people that provide opportunity. We'll recognize those people that will voice and give credit to those people that have influenced that. And then again, the other important thing on equal status, make sure every member in the organization has equal opportunities to develop their skills and progress in the organization, and you're having those conversations. And then people will all feel like valued and respected teammates that can contribute to the organization. What I'd like to do is kind of now go back to the ABC model, and I'd like to kind of explain how the contact theory operates. And remember, we said norms of equality, equal status, and we've codified our culture. our policies, procedures, practices, processes, structures, and systems now, instead of societal institution support, put team and organizational support, culture, and P4S2s, are saying that discrimination is wrong, fair and equal treatment of everybody is right. So we've now got the support system or the context in place, and we got the conditions set so that we got people from diverse backgrounds working together, and they're now in sustained close contact. And we're saying that the fairness and equality is the right thing to do. It's our core value. It's part of our organizational identity. We're reinforcing that. And what's going to end up happening as people are engaging and changing their behaviors to do this fairness and equality behaviors, leaders need to be sending the message and link on why that's important, how the team and the organization is enhancing, how individuals are growing, and what that is doing, and couple this with the sustained close contact. I'm now working with members from diverse groups. We're sharing cultural information, faith information, philosophical information. What's happening now is you can look in the cognitions and beliefs, those are now being filled with accurate, actual experience and probably very positive cognitions and beliefs. And as that's doing, it's replacing that generalizability about it. I'm getting deeper groups. And when those cognitions and belief, the majority of them are positive, and then the more they start to get positive, you'll see the affect or the prejudice start to reduce, and it may come to neutral or actually go to positive. And when that happens is you'll see a cessation of the discrimination behavior or the negative behavior towards groups, and you're going to see people start to engage on their own, internally motivated to engage on their own in fairness and treating people equally, because that's the right thing to do. And again, what we've done is by that nice, it's using the nice as set in the context, we're now giving the opportunity for people to fill accurate cognitions and beliefs, their stereotypes. It's starting to reduce the prejudice or even flip it to a positive, and we're now starting to shape that positive behavior, treating people equally. And again, the important thing on this is the team and the organization has to set the context through their culture and their P4S2s to reinforce the fairness and the equal treatment, and that we all will not tolerate the discrimination behavior. Jose, do you want to wrap up on the benefits?
I sure do. One of the things that I'll say in that last slide, the importance of that slide is that you have a conceptual framework for how these things work. Every now and again, somebody might ask, well, do we really still have systemic racism? Do we really still set people aside or apart? Why do people claim this is so prevalent? Here's a pretty straightforward ABC conceptual framework that has been empirically validated. It's been around for a long time, longer than Pat and I. I mean, it's not just that people are either making it up or feeling their way in the dark. And so at the end of the day, as a social scientist, I love a good conceptual framework because it helps answer the question, why is this important? Now, 5 very quick benefits to sum up nice. Number 1, recruit and retain good people. Speaks for itself. Number 2, have the kind of culture that brings out the full potential, not the half potential, but the full potential in all of its members. Number 3, encourage innovation through collaborative synergy. Time and time again, the more diverse the team is, the better the outcomes empirically tend to be. Number 4, set the example. You are the leaders at whatever level you are, and your stakeholders are both internal and external. If you are setting this as a priority for yourself, they'll make it a priority for themselves. And then last but not least, Pat has talked about this time and time again, performance. If you tie these kinds of behaviors and this kind of self-awareness and work to performance, it will spread throughout the organization. Okay, so we've only got a couple of slides left, and I wanted to leave you with something that I talked a lot about in my own team and trying to talk about more and more in the community. I happen to think that we have not been talking about diversity as effectively as we should. And so lately, I've been changing the narrative a bit on what folks in my shop would call the work with a capital W, right? And when we talk about the work, we're talking about diversity work. So let me leave you with this before we have our last slide and go into questions. Number one, diversity is compliance. And compliance isn't bad. We need compliance. But compliance is also a relatively low bar to have. So if your organization values diversity, that's great. Think about it as compliance and think about it as, boy, we really can't stop there. So if diversity is compliance, then inclusion is conscientiousness. And think about how high our conscientiousness has been over the last 3 or 4 weeks since the murder of Mr. George Floyd, and how our Black and African American team members and colleagues have been trying to help us increase our own consciousness. Think about how we have wanted to increase our own consciousness. The more conscious you are, the more inclusive you're going to be. And again, that's better than just being compliant. But it's not where we stop. As organizations, we need to display a commitment to equity. And so if you and your teams are kind of unfamiliar with or aren't too comfortable with using words like diversity, inclusion, and equity, well, first of all, you could work on that. But second of all, I offer you their parallel processes of compliance, consciousness, and commitment. And it's that commitment that people are looking for when we say we're all about equity. That's great. How are you going to demonstrate that commitment? And we've given you a pretty good set of examples on how you can demonstrate that. And last but not least, if you're going to go through this work of working on compliance, working on consciousness, and working on commitment, don't forget the 4th C, which is communicate at every single step. Communicate in a transparent way, communicate in a way that cuts across your teams, but don't forget to say and share the good work you're doing to value these core principles in your organizations. Pat?
Just to wrap it up, what I like to echo is General Mattis talked about the battle cry on D-Day. In union, there is strength. And what I'd like to talk about is that as individuals, if each individual assumes responsibility to make sure that their group schemas are accurate, if they wake up every day and make a commitment that I'm going to treat the people I engage with or interact with today by the golden rule or the platinum rule, and if they engage in activities to learn about the different groups that they interact with, ask questions about it, study about it, what ends up happening is individuals become change agents. And not only you change yourself, but the people that you interact with. Then let's take it up to the team and organizational level. And here I'm going to focus on leaders because the leaders are the ones that control the culture and the P4S2s to set the context for equality. But at the team levels, if they codify their values, if they review their P4S2s to make sure that everybody is treated equally in the organization, they work to build trust and psychological safety, and more importantly, that they commit to hold all members accountable, then you're going to see, and this is teams at all levels, you're going to see organizations transform. I want to share an example of our North Carolina Chief Justice, Sherry Beasley. She made a statement earlier saying that she is assuming responsibility to make sure the North Carolina judicial system treats all people fairly. And it is her responsibility and the members of the Supreme Court to do that. After she made that public statement that there was chief justices across the country said that they're going to do the same thing, that they're going to review to make sure that the organization they lead has a context where all people are going to be treated equally. And again, transformational. And the final one is communities. If community leaders and community members get together and decide that, hey, we're going to lead and make sure that there's opportunities for all people to be successful, make sure that the systems and the institutions are fair to everybody, we will transform communities. And I want to share an example with you. In Omaha, there was 200 plus business leaders. These were the CEOs of companies got together and they created what they called as code. And it was a commitment to opportunity, diversity, and equity. And it had 6 promises that every one of those CEOs committed to, that they were going to go into their organization, make sure that their culture and their P4S2s were fair, treated everybody equally, and provided everybody an opportunity. And the leaders said that they, as a community, could get together and have a transformational impact. One of the most important things on that code, the last promise on that code, is they're going to periodically get together and report out the progress they're making in their organization. So we have accountability mechanism and also share best practices. So we're sharing that. And again, we're going to transform our communities. And that gives us the hope that if we're all doing this at each level, then we're going to transform our country and we will be a guiding force in helping the world and spread equality through that. What we've done today is just briefly introduced you to Allport's contact theories, talked about some of the leader behaviors or the behaviors you can engage in, and apply Allport's contact theory to help reduce biases, to help reduce prejudice and discrimination in the teams and organizations that you lead or that you are part of. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing here and we're going to go to where it's the question and answer. So we'll open it up and just have a professional dialogue. Jose, I have a question for you. What is next at Wake Forest? What's the next steps?
Thanks, Pat. For those of you that are familiar with the institution or are on any of the listservs, the president announced last week the completion of the president's report, the President's Commission on Race, Equity, and Community. There are a couple of folks on this call who are members of that commission. That is our next actionable step. That is where the equity that we talk about so much becomes a commitment to actions. The report included not only 20 recommendations that we as an institution, should we enact them, will be tangible, verifiable steps forward, but also contextualization of those recommendations in a 20-page report that precedes the actual recommendations. I would encourage all of you who either are related to Wake Forest or are considering how to change the culture and how to bring change to your organizations to read the report. It's not short, it's thorough, it's deep, it is honest. And I think for any of us who are charged at any level to bring the kind of change that our underrepresented colleagues are hoping for and frankly have been waiting for a long time, the honesty is where it needs to start. The ability for leaders to be self-aware and acknowledge the things they know about and the things they don't know about. I oftentimes joke with our Senior Vice President for Administration, Hoff Milam, that I know nothing about GAAPs. What are those generalized accepted accountability practices? I don't know what a gap is. And Hoff doesn't know much about inclusion and equity and all the theories, for example, but he is so willing to learn more and more and more about how we can act more equitably. And unfortunately, my love of gap doesn't come anywhere close to his desire to be more equitable. So I'll work on that. So that's our first step is operationalizing that report. I think our second step, and I'll stop here, is continuing to recognize the lived experiences of all folks on our campus. We have over 8,000 students that live and learn on our campus. We have over 3,000 colleagues, employees that work and sometimes live on our campus as well, frankly, depending on how close they are. And we fail to oftentimes value and acknowledge their lived experience. And so the more that we can become aware and then seek to gain empathy around those lived experiences, the better off we're all going to be. I talk a lot in threes. I gave you my 3 C's. I've got 3 kids. So the last 3 I'll leave you with is awareness, acknowledgement, and accountability. We need to work on being aware. We need to work on being acknowledging these different realities. And then we need to work on being accountable to ourselves and to our community. So as we acknowledge lived experiences, we're going to end up being a much better university for it.
Jose, where can we find that report?
Easy. Community.wfu.edu. Community.wfu.edu is where Wake has archived all 3 of our major initiatives around race and equity. The commission is on there, the Slavery, Race, and Memory Project is on there, and the Committee on the Intersection of Bias, Conduct, and Freedom of Expression is on there. If you go to that community.wu.edu website, the first thing you will see is the President's Commission. We've got the report, which Dr. Hatch made public last week. We've got a condensed version of the recommendations. So if you don't want to read the 88-page report, which is fine, no offense taken, the 3 pages of the recommendations are on there as well.
We have a question. As a business leader, how do you begin the personal introspective look at your own blind spots and biases?
Pat, I've been talking. I don't know if you want to take this.
Why don't you start and I'll follow up afterwards.
I think you have to be honest with yourself. Shayna, what I'm most grateful for in your question is that it acknowledges that you have blind spots and bias. And I don't think anybody on this call would be surprised to know that for a lot of people, it's hard to even acknowledge you have a blind spot and a bias. So what I oftentimes tell business leaders is 2 questions. Number 1, why is it important to you acknowledge your biases and your blind spots? And number 2, what do you think they are? Write them down. I mentioned I'm a counselor, so I'm big on journaling, right? I don't journal as much as I should, but I'm big on journaling. If you can acknowledge why it's important to you, not others, but to you, right? Why is it important for you to have a team that feels valued? Not because it's the right thing to do, but because you have something in your core that wants to value people. If you start there and you jot down the biases that you have, then you can check them. I've got a bias for a variety of things, right? And so the only way that I can work on them is if I jot them down and then actively seek out information, conversations. Don't stop at the Facebook plug. You know that's not enough. Don't stop at the wiki. You know that's not enough. But by the way, let me just say for all of you that are feeling a certain kind of way about that, it's a good place to start. I say this all the time to folks who are starting this journey. Go easy on yourselves. Give yourself some grace. You're not going to get it. It's going to ruffle some feathers. But be willing to start and continue, because this work is really, really hard. So Shayna, that's what I would say. Those 2 places for me are good places to start.
Just to add to that, from a leader's perspective is, the other one is we talked about the importance of 360s. The other thing I always did is I call it an accountability partner. I had a trusted key leader that would give me candid feedback, and also they would be also pulse around the organization and kind of feed it back up. So, hey, this was perceived as this, then we can clarify it. Self-awareness and reflection, and studying, talking about the potential biases, reading about it. The self-study and reflection is very, very powerful. And one last technique is if you're interacting with a particular group, do an attitude mapping of it. What are the beliefs and, what are your beliefs about this particular group, and map them out and see, are they positive, negative, neutral? And are they accurate or are they not? And again, if they're not, then interact, learn more about the group, learn more about the faith. And what I'd ask you all is if you have techniques that you've used and it's been successful, please send it to us. We can put them together, and our goal is to create tools and products not only to help the education of the students, but also to help the education of business leaders and community leaders. So that's our charter as the center. Jose, do you want to close us out?
Genuine gratitude and acknowledgement for you all being here today. It's lunchtime. It's a long week. It's only Thursday. And yet here you are taking a moment and making the most of it. These topics, again, are prevalent in our society now, but they've always been here. As business leaders, as civic leaders, as good-minded folk who lead teams and set goals, if you don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. And if you don't do it, it won't get as well done as we know it can be because you're at the helm. So thank you for your caring to these topics, but also thank you for your attention as well. I've dropped my email in the chat box. If you have any follow-ups, I'm available to work with folks as needed, and I wish you a good rest of your week. Thanks again, Pat and Lynn, for getting this on.
You're welcome. And thanks, everybody. And remember, we bring change one individual at a time. So go out and be the change. Thank you all. Have a wonderful week.